If you like this channel and what I do here, please help to support my work by checking out one of my books, available from Lulu Publishing and Amazon.com. Thank you. Hi folks, Carl Jones here from Electric Media Madness. You're joining me today for Star Trek Discovery, Episode 11, The Citadel. Unfortunately, with work and family commitments, jobs that I need to get done, things like that, the time of year, obviously, it's Christmas Eve today, I have not had the opportunity to get round to doing a proper review of this episode, so this is very much Electric Media Madness, old school, like my early Star Trek Picard reviews. Strictly audio. I haven't even got the opportunity to make myself presentable for camera. I'm also going solo today. Dan Ryan's unable to join me for this review as well, so this is very much old school. Really just an opportunity to just put my thoughts out there about the episode and bring you up to speed on what I thought about it, so I hope you enjoy this, but it's going to be a very brief review anyway. So in this episode, the Discovery goes into the Nebula to locate the Kelpian ship, the Federation starship that's been sending out the signal, also seemingly the source of the burn. The ship can't take the stress of the effects of the nebula, so they send Book and his little ship into the nebula instead. They find a planet made of dilithium. They decide to send an away team down to the planet, which consists of Saru, Michael Burnham and Dr. Culber. They leave Tilly in command of the ship, which Admiral Vance doesn't seem to look very impressed about that. Burnham talking about Saru, saying that I'm not sure he can be objective because he's been quite emotional about the fact that he's going to be meeting some more Kelpians and things like that. This idea of characters being objective, it's a bit of a laugh really, because most of the crew of Discovery aren't particularly objective characters, so to point this out, to highlight this where Saru's concerned, is a bit of an irony really. We also have Michael Burnham telling Tilly, "You belong in that chair," the command chair. I will reiterate this again. No, she doesn't. I think she knows herself that she doesn't belong in the chair. We'll come to some points about why the writers go out their way to make it look like she does in this episode, but we'll come to that in a moment. Culber, Burnham and Saru beam down to the planet. Well, they think they've been down to the planet. They've actually beamed onto the ship. When they arrive, they're in this very, very surreal, very strange, dreamlike setting, and their appearances have changed. Burnham is now a Trill, Culber is a Bajoran, and Saru is human, so we get to see the full face of Doug Jones in this episode, get to see him emote a bit more without the layers of prosthetics on his face. So it turns out that they've actually beamed onto the holodeck of the ship. They meet a Kelpian who's the offspring of the doctor that sent out the message from the ship. It seems that this offspring's grown up on the holodeck. It's portrayed in such a way as though he doesn't realise that he's on a holodeck. He thinks this program that he's living in is actually the real world, and there's various holograms within the program that interact with him to educate him and keep him alive and keep him safe, that sort of thing. He thinks that the three members of the away team are just aspects of that program. They initially talk about them coming from the real world, but they realise that there's something amiss here, so they go along with this idea that they are actually programs. They pretend they're programs. Meanwhile, Discovery's holding position outside the nebula because there's some radiation and things like that, and it means that the ship can't go in there, so they give them several hours on the planet. They give them anti-radiation medication so they keep them safe for the short time that they're. I think they can only stay for about 4 hours. Discovery is actually repairing its shields outside the nebula before they can return to beam the away team back. Then they think they're being approached by a Federation starship, but it actually turns out to be Osiris' ship from the Emerald Chain. Back on the ship, Burnham finds these sort of like it's like a citadel or a castle or something like that. I'm assuming that's why the episode's called the Citadel, with these doors which are all sort of tied up and chained up, but the doors burst open. Saru and Colbert go to talk to the Kelpian. Meanwhile, Michael Burnham's staying just to keep an eye on this citadel because there's some sort of weird creature that's living inside there. It looks slightly Kelpian. It looks like the smoke monster out of Lost, but I'll come to the Lost theme again in a moment. The Kelpian doctor created this holoprogram to protect and educate her child, so should the child be left alone. We find out that the away team is starting to be affected by the radiation. They meet some other interesting holodeck programs there. There's like this elderly Kelpian who's like a storyteller. He tells tales and he sings a lullaby to Saru. And then when they meet up again and the creature is sort of like going around by the Kelpian. Saru sings the lullaby. I don't know if it was the same lullaby, but he sings a lullaby, and the weird creature disappears, and it kind of ends there, really. Not much else. It's like this weird sort of signal that blasts out when the Kelpian sort of no screams or something like that to get rid of the creature, and it sends this sort of blast wave out. They believe that might have had something to do with the burn. Back on the ship, Osira's ship arrives, and they beam men onto Discovery, and Tilly orders them to jump away, but they get in there first and stop Stamets from doing the spore drive thing. Just before this had happened, they sent Book out in his ship to try and rescue the away team. He manages to get Burnham off the planet, but I think Saru and Colbert are left behind. I'm pretty sure that's, unless I missed something there, but I'm pretty sure that they were left behind. Osira takes over Discovery, and Book and Burnham return to the site of where Discovery was, but now that Osira's commandeered it, she's attached her ship to the Discovery and used the spore drive to jump not only Discovery but her ship to Federation headquarters. And we see in the teaser for the next episode that this is like an attack on sort of the Federation headquarters, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. So that's really the plot. Regards my thoughts, there's not really a lot to say. Overall, I generally thought this episode was awful, but it did have one thing in its favour, and that was the holodeck stuff. It's very sort of fairy tale-esque in its portrayal. Kind of reminded me of television series Lost, which is hardly surprising with Secret Hideout being involved with this, the production company for this show, basically, and Alex Kurtzman. Reminded me of the days of Lost before it turned into this sort of massive convoluted mystery box with no explanation or sense to it. But I really found the portrayal and the imagery of the holodeck quite interesting. It's visually, it was very pleasing to the eye. I also like the idea of the away team given a bit of a holodeck makeover when they look like Bajoran and Trill and all that. But all of this is purely aesthetic. It's just a surface sheen to the episode. The idea of somebody being trapped in a holodeck and not knowing it or wanting to accept that they're in a holodeck is hardly an original thing. If you think about episodes like Star Trek Next Generation, Ship in a Bottle, Deep Space Nine's Our Man Bashir, Voyager's Bride of Chaotica, the list goes on and on, so it's hardly an original thing. The scenes on Discovery, they truly are of the worst kind. The acting is awful. The writers desperately want the viewers to think that Tilly can be a fantastic acting captain, that she can do a fantastic job. They give her loads of this attitude and this ballsy dialogue, but the script doesn't track with the very nature of the way the character's been written since the very beginning of the series, so it's disingenuous. The whole thing anyway becomes a pointless exercise in the end, because ultimately Osira takes over the ship and brings Tilly's command to a very abrupt end. Speaking of Osira, to build her and the Emerald Chain up as the big bad of this season, presumably that's what we're doing, there's only 2 episodes left I think now, it shows the complete lack of imagination on the part of the show's writers. The whole idea of the Emerald Chain it's very uninspiring from a story perspective anyway. The only thing that seems to make them a seeming threat is their brute nature, their violent intent to control other species, the numbers, ships, weapons, and their brutish tactics, but really that's it. They don't seem to portray any real and palpable sense of menace in the sense that the likes of the Borg or the Dominion once did in Star Trek. The real shortcoming is that as a story concept they're very one-note, quite bland and underwhelming. And the same could also be said of their leader, Osira. She's a stereotypical and cliched female villain, clad in a leather cat suit, hurling out allegedly quippy one-liners. But the character is so... It's been done to death in science fiction, it's been done to death in fiction in general. But I almost expected her at one point to pull out a long fake moustache, stick it in her face and start twirling at the ends. She was that cliched. Again, emphasis is put on the Adira and Grey characters and their story, but there's no real interest whatsoever to be gleaned here on the part of the audience, aside from the fact that their story doesn't seem to really be going anywhere or saying anything of value. The fault of their story lies in the really quite appalling and amateurish thesping, if you could call it that, of the 2 actors involved. There's no natural chemistry to the actors either, meaning that I struggled to see any believability to their characters' relationships. Ordinarily, this is not a prerequisite for liking or finding something good in a TV show and these types of characters, but given that the writers have been grandstanding about these characters' roles as a representative of a specific identity politics agenda in the show, the least they could do is make them believable, which is something that they don't manage to do here. Overall, this really is quite an incredibly poor episode, particularly when it comes to advancing the season-long story arc that's been constantly hinted at. Ordinarily, the seizure of the main vehicle or whatever in a Star Trek show by the might of a big bad, for a good example, I'd say check out Deep Space Nine, A Call to Arms, a very good example of this. That should have been edge-of-the-seat stuff, but this is just dull. All I would say here that at least the show is being consistent in that regard. For my overall score of this episode, I'm giving this episode a 2. And that's actually a bit higher than I have been giving these episodes of late. But that 2 is purely for the imagery and the sense of dreaminess that evoked in the holodeck portions of the episode. Something that I actually quite liked about this episode, but the rest of this is just trash. It really is. For now, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this video, well, for listening to me anyway. Please like, share, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd truly, truly appreciate it. I also want to take this opportunity to say Merry Christmas to you all as well. I hope you have a great time, whatever you're up to. Stay safe, look after each other. I also want to remind people as well that on Christmas Day at 6 p.m, we will be dropping our Christmas special rewatchable. It's a mystery Christmas sci-fi special. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what we're going to be talking about, but it's Christmas science fiction themed. I really hope you enjoy it. We had a lot of fun when we were making it. We recorded it back in October because of the restrictions on getting together in the UK, so we had to record it then. But I really hope you enjoy the video. For now, take care of yourselves and each other. I will see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye.